In the winter of 1870, Paris still tried to look like Paris. Dining rooms stayed lit. Waiters still carried plates with ceremony. Men in coats still unfolded menus as if the city beyond the windows were merely inconvenienced, not trapped. And on some of those menus appeared meats that sounded less like dinner than inventory from a menagerie. Camel, antelope, bear. Then the detail that turned rumor into legend. Elephant. Not metaphorical elephant. Real elephants from the Jardin des Plantes, slaughtered, butchered, and sold for consumption, while the capital of European taste tried to eat with a straight face. It sounds like a bizarre historical footnote. Paris ate the zoo. But the elephant matters for a darker reason. It was not random absurdity. It was the end of a sequence. Before a city eats its elephants, it eats through almost everything else. Its reserves, its livestock, its pets, its pests, and finally its symbols. By the time zoo animals reached the plate, Paris was not simply hungry. It was being stripped, layer by layer, of the systems that made its elegance possible. The disaster began with speed. In 1870, war broke out between France and Prussia. What many expected to be a short conflict became a military collapse. By September, the emperor was captured, the regime had fallen, and Paris found itself encircled by German forces. Rail lines were severed, roads were controlled, normal trade stopped. The daily inflow that fed, heated, and supplied one of Europe's largest cities was cut. Paris was still enormous and politically central, but now it was an island on land. At first, the mood was not despair, but defiance. There was talk of resistance, relief, endurance. Paris would hold. Paris would outlast the siege. There was ingenuity too. Messages went out by balloon, because everything ordinary had failed. And that was the real weakness. Paris was sophisticated, dense, interconnected. It depended on circulation. Shut the routes, and the problem was not immediate collapse, but something more methodical. A shrinking list. At first there is enough, then enough for some, then substitutes, then scavenging. The first major conversion was visible everywhere. Horses. In normal times, horses powered urban life. Under siege, they became meat. Paris was beginning to eat the very machinery of its own daily existence. But shortages did not affect everyone at the same speed. Food often becomes unaffordable before it disappears. So prices rose. Ordinary staples became harder to obtain. Households that could still pay bought time. Households that could not were pushed toward whatever remained. Then the ladder dropped again. Dogs and cats entered the food economy. Rats, too, an animal abundant in the hidden seams of the city, now reclassified as sustenance. Markets adapted. Traders improvised. Butchers expanded their definitions. Hunger created opportunities for fraud, euphemism, and culinary theater. Menus helped perform that trick. A grim novelty could be dressed as sophistication. Desperation could be plated. But every substitution marked another failure of normal life. And then there was the zoo. The animals of Paris's menageries were not livestock. They were exhibits, scientific specimens, imperial trophies, public wonders. To look at them was to see a world gathered and organized by a great capital. To eat them was to admit that spectacle had become inventory. When the elephants were killed, the symbolism was impossible to miss. Everyone understood that something final had happened. A city may slaughter horses and still tell itself this is temporary. It may eat rats and call it resilience. But when it butchers its marvels, it is no longer preserving its old self. It is consuming it. Hunger was not democratic. In poorer districts, people faced the crisis early and directly. Long queues, thin rations, dark bread, cold rooms, constant uncertainty. Meanwhile, those with money could still delay the worst effects. They had access to private stores, better suppliers, and expensive substitutes. Siege did not erase hierarchy. It monetized scarcity. That is what makes the restaurant menus so revealing. They were not just curiosities, they were status theater. Refined dining survived as a performance long after the system underneath it had broken. The room remained elegant, the city feeding it did not. The zoo meats condensed all of this into one image. Empire on the plate, science reduced to butcher's stock. By the time the siege ended, the lesson was bigger than Paris. This was the slow throttling of an urban metabolism. A modern city depends on flows so constant they become invisible. Food, fuel, transport, information, labor. Cut those flows, and the city degrades, improvises, consumes its reserves, then consumes the structures that made normal life possible. That is why the elephant matters. Not because it is bizarre, though it is, but because it serves as a verdict. When supply vanished, Paris did not become primitive. It became transparent.